This economic healthcare challenge, it's a global economic healthcare challenge, has been mentioned a few times during this conference, but it's a raging debate throughout the entirety of the healthcare community. And I think that there are some great ways to address it. And I'd like to talk to you specifically from my view, from the view of an innovator, somebody who's been involved with medtech innovation for the past 20 plus years, involved with the whole growth of interventional cardiology and cardiac surgery and drug-eluting stents and mitral valve repair therapies, and seeing the evolution of technology over time and this huge challenge, this economic healthcare challenge that these kinds of technologies have actually created. And I'd like to propose to you that it's transformational innovation, really, that's the solution to this economic healthcare challenge. So let me describe to you a little bit about what I mean by transformational innovation. Transformational innovation generally occurs when there's an environmental change, when there's a fundamental thing that's larger than the technology or the innovation itself that really causes something that's very significant in the way that we innovate. All right? So let me give you a few examples outside of medical area. As we look at the mobile computing side of things, these aren't just cell phones that are things that we talk on. They've become very, very powerful tools, and they have transformed the way that we all think and work and act in our daily lives. And the environmental aspect of this was something that was fairly revolutionary in a lot of technology spaces, in that there's an open architecture that allows thousands, actually millions of developers to all bring their aspect of value to these particular tools to create something that's transformational, far beyond what the chipset designers really had in mind as these tools were developed. So the smartphones themselves really became what they are today because of an environment that was created. Maybe another example to bring this home is, you all remember this, the inconvenient truth, when a lot of awareness became focused on our environment. So this is truly an environmental impact. So as we all recognize the global warming, the challenges associated with our industrial systems that were creating this significant harm to our planet, this new environment really caused us to look how we innovate quite differently. And so one of the things that creates a lot of these hydrocarbon emissions, of course, is personal transportation. And so, looking at this environmental aspect, there's a whole set of innovation that occurred, transformational innovation, like Tesla, bringing forward something to address an environmental situation. Now, this isn't the same sort of evolutionary developments and innovations that the German or Detroit auto engineers were thinking of as they went through things. This took an environmental situation to really drive transformational innovation in personal transportation. So let me step back a little bit and talk about a little bit of the history and how we got to where we are in the healthcare innovation. What are the drivers? So, throughout my career and seeing a lot of the overall evolution of healthcare technology, there was an interaction between a healthcare provider and scientists or engineers. And the conversation really was one that drove the fundamentals of what innovations occurred, what medical technologies really were brought forward. And so the clinicians or the tool users would talk to the engineers or the tool makers about what cool new tools really would make them more effective in their practice. All right? So that was really the bulk of the conversation. And if that costs more, and it always did cost more, society would absorb those costs because there were a little bit better outcomes. All right? But there's an environmental change happening. And that environmental change is one that's different around the globe. Okay, there are a lot of different factors, but they all come to create a new environment that causes us to have to innovate completely differently. So in China, there are billions of new patients that need access to care. And that's not affordable to just suddenly have a glut of billions of patients coming in to need new infrastructure and new care and new therapies. All right? In Japan, there's an emphasis on quality, ever-increasing quality. This has significant ramifications as far as the amount of work and effort and diagnostics and therapeutics and follow-up to raise that quality, and the cost of that is unsustainable in Japan. In the U.S., we all hear every day the kinds of challenges we have affording health care. And as we look forward, we know we can't continue to afford health care the way we are. And layered upon that, you have things like the European economic crisis or the global economic crisis that really causes us to have even less capability to afford the current standards that we have in the evolution of development of new technologies. So let me focus a little bit more in on cardiovascular disease to put this in context. In 2010, cardiovascular disease alone attributed more than $800 billion of cost in the healthcare system. And in 2030, that's expected to be over $1 trillion of costs in the healthcare system. Now, I say expected because we all have kind of this natural course of bringing out new therapies and new technologies and developing new tools to layer upon the old tools that's going to cost more. And so as we look at this approach is part of the problem. This approach is part of really the situation that we're expecting. So we look at, in my particular world of interventional cardiology, we looked at being able to provide blood supply to the myocardium through the coronary arteries. And when they get blocked, you don't get very good blood supply, right? And you have symptomatic patients. And as interventional cardiology community looked at it, we focused in on this vessel. We focused in on how that blood vessel is doing. And we looked at things like restenosis and target vessel revascularization and all these sorts of things. And we asked, how can we make those better? And it always took a little bit cooler technology, a little bit more innovation here or there, and it always cost a bit more. But we never really did step back and ask the right question. Not so much how is the vessel doing, but how is the patient doing? How is that patient improving? Are the symptoms being reduced? Is that patient no longer feeling chest pain? It's interesting that even after open heart surgery or coronary stent or something, probably 1 out of 4 patients still feels angina, still feels that chest pain, and has to go back into the hospital for multiple diagnostics and subsequent procedures. We ask, how's the vessel doing? Not so much how is that patient doing. We need to make healthier patients who don't need to go back into the healthcare system, and we need to design tools specifically with this in mind, run clinical trials with this specifically in mind, and reduce the overall cost of healthcare. So it's interesting that the way that we're thinking now is there's this term called a QALY. I don't know if anybody ever heard of a QALY. It's a quality adjusted life year. And we expect that if you can improve either the patient's quality of life or the length of their life, you will get reimbursed up to, in the U.S., about $40,000 per QALY. That's built into the system. If you can improve some outcome, it costs more. And I propose to you that that's really not the right way it needs to go. We need to improve the outcomes to reduce the cost. Now, to do this, it needs to have the entire ecosystem focused on the same goal. So as we look at not just these tool makers, but also academia and the relationship with academia, that technology, the focus of the technology needs to change. We need to have healthcare policy that focuses on this. We need to look at the overall economics to capture the right things as we move technologies forward. As we look at the startups around the world, startups are having a lot of challenges, except for maybe digital health. A lot of healthcare startups are having a problem getting funding. So that funding typically comes from the large cap healthcare companies now, who make equity investments and sit on the boards and guide a lot of startups as to, here's your exit strategy. If you can do this, we'd be very interested in purchasing you. Or if you can do this, you would have a great avenue into commercialization, and we may be your partner in that commercialization through excellent scale-up capabilities of the more experienced larger companies. But it doesn't stop there. These giants of industry really need to all collaborate together. There was a recent announcement by AbbVie, large drug company, and Google working together, looking at how to manage the big data associated with aging and the diseases of aging, together with pharmaceutical therapies, and pulling those together. So it's an entire ecosystem that needs to be focused on this same goal of decreasing the overall cost of healthcare, not just allowing it to increase. So let me just reiterate exactly my thesis here. In the beginning of medical technology development, the costs were manageable and the impact on outcomes was reasonable, but not very good. And as outcomes continue to increase or improve, costs significantly increased. And that's the expectation. Well, it's a pretty simple premise, but not one that's instilled throughout the innovation community, that we need to be driving towards improving the outcomes and decreasing those costs. That should be the fundamental tenet of innovation. Let me close by mentioning a concept of an iatrogenic disease. All right, we have an iatrogenic disease here. So an example would be a patient goes in for open heart surgery. They have their conduits all put in place so they get better blood flow to the myocardium. Their heart is working better. They feel better, but in the same process during recovery, they develop bed sores and an infection. And that the bed sores and the infection cause a huge burden to that patient's health care, not only to the cost of care, but to that patient's quality of life. And they're in the hospital much longer, and it costs a lot of extra money. So, it's a disease that basically happens when you're trying to resolve another disease. That in the process of solving one, you create another disease. Well, let me propose to you that healthcare technology development has created the iatrogenic disease of killing innovation. We can no longer afford to innovate because the fundamentals of healthcare cost so darn much. Well, if we use this concept of transformational innovation, improving outcomes in a way that inherently decreases cost, pretty simple concept, but if we hold to that tenet, we can cure this iatrogenic disease of killing innovation. All right, I'll stop there and take any questions if you have.
I've got one.
Yep.
I'm wondering if you could cite any medical examples that improve outcomes and at the same time reduced costs.
So an example of this kind of approach is one that I actually know of and have been involved with for a while, and that's using percutaneous technologies to be able to go in and repair a leaky mitral valve in patients who are so sick that they really aren't good surgical candidates. All right? So it's pretty fancy. It's pretty expensive. The procedure probably costs $20,000. But as you look at this technology, these patients are really sick, and they go into the hospital over and over and over again for heart failure. And they cost a huge amount of money. So as we looked at this, we studied the expense of how many times the patients went in for heart failure before this procedure, and then with this all prospectively proposed as the thesis, we also looked at the total costs after the procedure and saw that there was about about a 60-70% reduction in the patients going back into the hospital for heart failure because we've repaired this mitral valve regurgitation. So we had to start with the concept in mind of what are the costs, and if we apply this technology, what are the subsequent costs for, the years following the procedure. So it ends up having a significant reduction in the overall cost of medicine, even though the procedure itself was fairly expensive. But without that, it's great to do this for patients, but we need to also study what are the economic impacts so we can continue to fund that technology. So that's one example of a percutaneous mitral valve repair actually is very cost effective.
Any questions from the audience? I could ask one more. All right, thank you.